Well, hello, everyone. Good morning if you are, yeah, I think it's still morning in all the time zones. And I'll just say I'm Cecily Taylor. I work at Fair & Peers. We're a transportation consulting firm, mostly based on the West Coast. I'm in San Diego, but we do have a couple offices on the East Coast and in the mountain area as well in Pacific Northwest. And I don't have something particularly planned, but I did want to share a tool that we put together compiling research on how different policies or business trends affect how people travel. This is a couple weeks too early because this was released last summer, and obviously we know a lot more now than we did last summer in terms of how the fact that the vaccine is now being rolled out. Looking at schools probably coming back if they haven't already, that sort of thing. So this is undergoing an update to reflect that, but I think it's still an interesting maybe demonstration of what we might be able to see coming out of this. So I definitely want to keep this open, but the way that this tool works is for all of these different trends, I'll end up going through them. You can make this prediction. So I think personally I feel pretty good about employment and labor force participation, so maybe that's not one we want to change, but fuel prices and auto operating costs is one it looks like the administration might be considering something like additional fees for gasoline cars. California is definitely, I think, interested in this as well. With the new, if you're not familiar, we're now looking at VMT as our transportation impact for environmental studies. So that this is definitely something that will probably increase cost to vehicle users down the line. So if we can kind of see that if we're predicting that there's going to be some kind of increased cost for auto users, well, as you might think, the people's driving likelihood goes down, and maybe they're replacing driving with transit. It's a pretty small effect, but it's there. Something that has a bit of a bigger effect would be, do we think that our residents currently in cities and businesses currently in cities might shift to the suburbs, and will there be major reductions in density because of health concerns coming out of the pandemic? And so if I'll kind of do that again, that we see a pretty big jump that looks like about 10% increase in VMT expected. So there's definitely assumptions built into this in the back end, but this is all based on research of how a change in the surrounding land use density is statistically correlated with people's driving behavior. So again, I didn't have anything in particular planned, but it might be fun to kind of go through this and crowdsource some predictions here. There's a bunch of different the categories of trends we can enter related to how comfortable do people feel riding transit, what's the interest in micromobility and other kind of shared devices. So I guess I'll just kind of check in with the room here, see if anyone has questions about this or wants to pitch a prediction based on some of these that I'm showing.
So my area is on-demand services and mobility as a service, so taxis, TNCs, things like that. Do you have a tab for that? Because the amount of VMT they generate is significant, and also we don't have public data for San Diego, but we do have public data for Chicago and New York. In Chicago, Uber and taxis are 1 out of 5 transit trips, and in New York, they're 12% of transit trips. So I'm just wondering. You know,
So when you say percent of transit trip, you mean taking a TNC to transit
no,
as part of your?
I mean, if you consider TNCs and taxis transit, I do, and just add up the total number of trips.
Gotcha.
Again, New York 12%, Chicago 20%, but we know that because they release public data. Most of them don't have public data, but certainly even in cities with high car ownership rates, you're going to see 1 to 3% of all rides in a day are going to be in these on-demand services. So I'm just curious if that's built into the model.
We definitely have this category related to how, what trend do we think TNCs will take? Do we think, if auto users are, I guess if people are shifting from transit to cars and TNCs because of fear of more shared modes, and that affects VMT, or even if just transit is the need lower load factors, if there's ongoing need to address that. So that's built into the tool to some extent. But yeah, that's interesting and maybe not surprising that these TNC rides are making up a good portion of rides. I myself have, I'm normally a transit user, but there have been a couple times that if I just missed my bus and I don't want to wait another half hour for the next one, or maybe it's raining or there's something else, it's later at night than I wanted, then I'm more likely to get in a Lyft or something, at least back before everything changed.
Cecily, Cody Kratz here on the West Coast, and I'm curious about the back end of this. Is this something that is like just a sole product to buy it from parent peers, or is there like API access? Or, I also wonder about localizing this kind of a travel demand model. I mean, every place is different. This is obviously meant to be very simple, but as a tool to kind of build on. Is that what you work on, or do you guys have like a technology team of data scientists doing all that maybe I could connect with?
Yeah, definitely happy to connect you with our data scientists. I should put in the chat our kind of on our website, fairandpeers.com. You can find a page on TrendLab, and there's like a connect with us as well. But yeah, we have this was done in-house. We have some transportation professionals that with data science expertise, and really from what I saw, I didn't have a very large role in this, to be transparent, but I believe this started as just kind of an Excel tool. So the back end is there's a lot of calculation, but it's not very complicated, I guess, because it's just the research sources are documented in that, and the elasticities, and then the assumptions. This just says major reductions in transit service, but to the elasticity would be tied to some particular route coverage, route frequency sort of thing. So making some assumptions of what is really meant by this. So it's definitely very customizable. We did work with the city of Tigard I believe in California, to kind of customize this for what they were particularly interested in, tweaking those back-end inputs and assumptions based on what they felt was appropriate for their city. So yeah, that's definitely something that we would we're interested in working with other jurisdictions if this is something that they would want to use. So please do reach out.
Hi, Cecily. This is Andy Sharp. So I'm wondering, have you worked with any transit agencies, specifically with transit ridership? Basically, I mean, obviously, we're talking a lot about VMT, but us in the transit sphere really want to see ridership come back. I mean,
Right.
certain commuter rail systems have been decimated up to 80, 85%. So have you consulted with any transit agencies?
We have. We've definitely consulted with transit agencies in terms of putting together plans to how could they increase their ridership. Are there also service planning? Is there any fixed route that if you're considering alternative service, like an on-demand type replacement, what could that look like? And we definitely do that type of work as well. To my knowledge, I don't know that we've worked with a transit agency with this tool. We do more, detailed ridership forecasting for transit agencies. But yeah, this is really general based on kind of national data. But we've done more detailed work with transit agencies.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Another big factor that I saw, and I think we're seeing in a lot of places, that traffic congestion levels, peak hour congestion levels, are starting to come back. But if there's I think during the pandemic when those peak hour congestion times, you just weren't seeing congestion at the same level. And but it was interesting that the amount of travel people were doing was still pretty close to pre-pandemic. It was just maybe happening at different times of the day. So that's something that the research seems to suggest it has a pretty large effect on how much VMT is generated.
One thing I just added, it strikes me that this is a useful tool, not only for understanding what's going to happen and projecting what's going to happen, but for guiding policy decisions about what should happen and how do we make sure that happens.
Exactly.
That's been on your mind, but that's how I'm because it is so. I mean, 2030 is a long ways out. I mean, I'm not sure. I always buy it's not so much a crystal ball, these kinds of models, but it does give you a sense of your alternatives and choices, given certain consistent variables. But yeah, so kudos for doing that. There's some stories to tell, I think, out of this.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's definitely a piece of the story that I should have mentioned, that the experts that develop this feel very strongly that it's not about this is exactly what's going to happen, but it's about understanding what we think is likely, and maybe it's a little more this way, maybe it's a little more that way, but what sort of policies can we put in place now, or get the ball rolling on putting in place now to affect that trajectory, and what sort of investments would be robust in the sense of it would be a good investment, even if the scenario is a little more this way, a little more that way. All of this investment would be good for all of the scenarios that we think are likely to happen.
Hi, Cecily. This is David Jarrett from GoTriangle in North Carolina. I am wondering if the only adjustable gears are the ones that are seen on the x-axis.
That's right. The tool, have to kind of balance how much control you have and how easy is it to use. So yes, we've just set these kind of 3 prediction years, and then there's some interpolation between them. But basically and again, this came out last summer, so this was kind of near term, what's going to be happening 1 year out, and then what's happening midterm, five years out and 10 years out. And yeah, this will be updated in the coming weeks. I would guess that the years 2025, 2030 will probably stay the same. But it's more, I think more, it's not so much about capturing detail in the chart year over year, but more just about understanding the extent of impact of each of these factors. I think that, each one taken individually, yes, you expect that more demand responsive transit service could help increase transit ridership, but understanding to what extent that affects transit ridership in VMT versus to what extent the use of transit versus TNCs affects. It's sort of about capturing the relative impact of each of these.
Yeah, thanks for that. Is TrendLab, is that a tool that Aaron Pierce is actively trying to solicit to other, transit agencies or local governments?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. We invest research into developing these tools, several different tools. This is one example. But the idea is that, if it's, we think it's something that is valuable to the transportation industry, and then we hope that jurisdictions are interested in maybe bringing us on to help consult and customize it for their jurisdiction, or help them figure out how to apply it in the way they need.
That's really good to know. I know our data analysts here at GoTriangle do actually a lot of research at VMT. And then we do that because we like to look at how service stacks up against how much do people drive within our region, since we do regional service. This is really cool to look at. Thanks for showing us.
Yeah. And before I forget, I'll put the our external website in the chat so you can all read more and reach out. I guess I'm curious to know how people in this group are feeling about transit, and do we think that people will go back to using transit, or will they be, there has not been any correlation that I've seen between riding transit and, increase in transmission of the coronavirus, but there's definitely a fear. And do we think people will feel comfortable coming back to transit, or not?
I think it's going to take some time, but I think eventually we will see, I'd say probably 80% of the pre-COVID ridership, but that might be a few years.
Do you think transit agencies will need to be maintaining social distance type, lower capacity?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think that's feasible. With budget-strapped agencies, they have limited buses, limited train cars. So if we do want to even go back to really 50 or 60%, I mean, it's nice to say that we can do that, but realistically, I don't think we can, unfortunately.
Sure.
If I could add on to that, so I was actually just having this conversation yesterday. I think what we're seeing, at least locally, is we're seeing in our ridership trends, we're seeing more urban all-day type ridership rather than more peak hour heavy
ridership, and we see that in some of our routes. So some routes that operate all day, every 30 minutes, that we call our core routes, and they operate every day. Ridership has gone down, but it hasn't been super significant. Some routes have seen 80% of the regular ridership during the weekend, even more ridership on the weekends in 2019, which is remarkable. But our routes that are more suburban focused, peak hour, 5 trips in the morning, 5 trips in the afternoon, and go from a suburban part of the region to downtown, those have suffered tremendously. And that's something that we're probably going to see for years to come, especially since a lot of these white collar desk jobs, most of those people are going to be working from home, 5 days a week for, the next few months. And then we'll start seeing more of a gradual rollback. So people will be working like 2-3 days a week, either from home or from the office. So I don't think that, I can't speak for every agency, I can't speak for the country, but I think, especially in our region, we'll see more relaxed ridership on long distance commuting, but looking at, routes that serve more of the urban communities, where people rely on cross-town travel, that ridership will be back very soon. And going back to Andy's point about capacity, it's like you said, it's not very feasible to maintain social distancing. What we've done is we've stayed fare free throughout the pandemic, and we're still fare free now. Oh. And in the terms of fare revenue, we actually don't have too much of a problem with the fare itself. It's operations that bless you. We are currently strapped with the lack of operators that we have. So if we continue to maintain distance with recovering ridership, we're not going to have enough people to operate our buses. So I think at the end of the day, when people come back, that'll actually in a way relieve our operators, so that way we're not, our operations, supervisors and operations managers aren't trying to, struggle with, run picks and things of that nature. So I do think we'll see a different type of trend going forward. But yeah, ridership will come back in some way, shape, or form, just not in the same way we saw it in 2019.
So, David, I'm very curious, and I have some predictions around this. I mean, just to build on what you're saying, it seems like it should be a busy year for Jarrett Walker and Associates. That really, and I'm presenting at a conference later this month, and I'm interested in. That's what probably when I hear good ideas is like I think that there's a lot of terms for this, but flexible transit is how Jarrett Walker refers to it, and I like that as a catch-all because it's the on-demand microtransit, all this stuff. I wonder if that is, if I'm right, that's going to be a big part of where agencies need to go. Is that everyone's going to need to redesign their system right now, and that the technology can really enable, honestly, breaking the laws of physics, possibly. And Jarrett might disagree with that, but to some degree, that's what starts to happen with technology. It's pretty wild. And reserving seats in advance, when the vehicle's full, another one can pop in. I mean, I'm not trying to glorify this. I know it's not, it would never be perfect, but I wonder if that's part of the path forward. And because, flexible transit is flexible, you can have something that's demand driven and start to, I'm very interested in commingling and, setting fixed stops in the midst of a otherwise flexed route or on-demand route, and seeing where the demand is, and in 2 years coming back with entirely new fixed routes that are responding to people's new work patterns. And my prediction is that it's going to be primarily focused on the service sector, that it's going to be service workers, and honestly, that's who we always should have been serving. I think there's been a huge mistake for a long time serving peak, white-collar knowledge workers. This was just a matter of time before they all kind of dropped out of the commuter force. So I don't foresee long-distance commuter rail coming back in any, I'm not sure that's going to be that relevant in the future. But I do think there's a need to serve service workers, people with disabilities, lower-income folks who don't have choices, and people who just kind of want to make that environmental choice. Does that any of that make sense, do you think?
No. as the on-demand guy in the room, well, I could go on and on, but I would say the short version is on-demand services really don't operate like fixed route services. And I think Jarrett, who's a very nice guy, I like his writings a lot, but I think trying to, turn a bus into not a bus is not going to work out so well for him. I think a lot of people see on-demand as kind of like a buzzword or like a hot new technology, and basically say, yeah, we can get people to come back to transit. We'll just make it a little more, a little more like their car experience. And there's no reason to do that because somebody's already doing it, and it doesn't cost you, the municipality, anything to have an Uber come into your community or Lyft. In fact, Via, which is not available in a lot of places, but they're already financially way ahead of Uber and Lyft in terms of profitability. They're basically selling themselves nationwide as the substitute, right? So in fact, I worked on an RFP for a county in Georgia where, because of census changes, they were losing a lot of their federal funding for traditional fixed route transit, and they're basically screwed. And they had to come up with an alternative plan to service. So they had Via come in, and Via is doing these kind of hub and spoke, not point to point, but hub and spoke kind of travel systems. And this particular county is a lot of factory workers. If you've ever had a chicken nugget, it probably came from there. These are not white collar knowledge workers. They just don't have any. It's a very far exurb of Atlanta. So everyone either commutes into Atlanta or they work at the chicken plant. There's no in between. But I think there are a lot of possibilities for hybrid systems between on-demand systems and a fixed route system. In fact, you could actually run, in Montreal, they run what they call the taxi bus in kind of low density areas on Montreal Island, where it's a car that runs a fixed route. And I proposed, if you follow me on Twitter, you've heard me talk about the scooper this week for places with very long headways. If you've got like a 45-minute headway, you can have something much cheaper and easier than a 40-foot bus follow up on kind of the off minutes to see if there's any stragglers, right? So the bus goes by, the guy comes in and he goes, oh snap, I just missed the bus, but hey, there's a on-demand vehicle, a microbus, a something that comes by afterwards. There's a lot of creative things you can do. But this idea of this kind of on-demand bus never works out because it's just too clunky a system, and agency people cover your ears now. Agencies really suck at implementing innovative technologies. It's much easier to do a partnership, and I've been in that world, the PPP world, and it just works out a lot easier because it's easier to get rid of. I think there'll be a lot of demand for Jarrett and his services, and he's hiring, by the way, for anybody listening, in that I think cities finally are ready to move beyond the bus route should be whatever the trolley routes were 80 years ago, and maybe our land use is different. We should restructure that. I think he's going to have a bonanza of a time doing that. But I know he's not super into this idea of on demand, and I think he's doing it because that's what the client demands. But I don't think the clients really understand how this stuff works. It's two different worlds, and you can mix them together, but operationally they're quite different.
If I could add on points, I do think what David says does make sense, where you can have a hybrid of both. In most cases, on demand is not going to replace fixed route unless you're Wilson, North Carolina, and you just get rid of your fixed route and you bring in Via to do everything for you. That's them. I don't know how that's working for them, but good for them. But I do think, going back to Cody's point about serving the service workers, what we're seeing is that, going back to the point of urban all day ridership, most of these are service workers that aren't necessarily trying to get to downtown per se. These are people that they're cross-town travelers, or they're stuck in a situation where they live in an area of a city that doesn't have one route that gets to where it needs to go, so they have to go downtown to come back out to the same part of the city, or it'll take them forever to get to. So I think in those kinds of scenarios, that's where on-demand service can fit in, and be more of a microtransit service that takes you shorter distances but doesn't replace a fixed route service that already exists. In many cases, they could supplement fixed route for people that don't have immediate, pedestrian infrastructure to get into the fixed route, or they just live too far away from a fixed route where, driving there might not work, but if you walk there, you'll get hit by a car. So I think in those kinds of cases, that's going to have to work going into the future, considering the clientele that transit agencies will be serving now that, we live in a more enlightened work from home world. So I think both of your points do make sense, and they can collaborate together somehow. But
well,
that's
David, I think you're a genius, and everything you say is right. So I'll fully endorse that. But I'll say, just to throw one more thing in there, is that auto use is about to radically change in the next 20 years, and what we're seeing already is that manufacturers are transitioning from a model where they sell a car to a dealer who then sells the car to you to where they just sell you the ride. So this model that we're all assuming is that it's going to continue like it does in the present day, where these single-person drivers drive in from the suburbs and then they occupy a lot of physical space downtown by parking their cars. That's going bye-bye. The cars will not need to be stored in a downtown area, but they may need to be staged, which is a little different. And I've already had meetings with parking companies, and they know this already. They're not stupid. So even in the Northeast, they're already thinking, how can we repurpose all this really excellent real estate we have? Well, we don't want to give it up. We don't want to sell it so someone can build something on it. But what else can we put there? That's going to also change how people interact with transit, because I could take the bus, or I already subscribe to General Motors, and they'll send over a Cadillac, because that's the category I'm in. I'm a baller, right? I subscribe at the premium level. And it may not be the same Cadillac every day, but it'll be close enough. It'll be roughly the same colorway. It'll be roughly the same comfort level. And all I do is pay them a subscription fee, like Netflix or HBO. That's the reality of what's coming, and I think transit agencies need to think really hard about how does that system interact with what they've got now, because nothing's ever going to beat a train or a bus. We're just moving like a ton of people really quickly and efficiently, but they're not necessarily going to be competing against the present day model.
If I may, just to come back to the tool that Cecily shared initially, and the notion of that being not a predictor but a tool for policy conversations, I think we should all ask ourselves what we want in our cities and communities in the future. And I'll be honest, that vision of the baller with the Cadillac subscription, that's really not why I come to Transportation Camp and like what I see as being what's needed in the future. I mean, they're going to be all taken care of. It actually makes me think, wow, what do we need to do in cities to make sure that that doesn't happen, to be honest, to make sure that we're not building it around the ballers that can afford to subscribe to a Cadillac every day, that we're building it around, should that space be used for open space and parks, right? Should it be used for community services? And I think this is where the physics does come in, is if you are moving people, we're a certain size and physicality, right? You're going to get into the physics there, right? It's how you pool us and all of that is where technology can help, and the staggering of the when and the where. But, I think I question whether, and I think this is the challenge that transit has had for a long time, is that we are centered on the product, the solution, not the problem, not the job to be done, as Clayton Christensen called it. So the job to be done is to get where you need to be, but honestly, that's even changing. The job to be done is, do you need to go to the grocery store to get your groceries, or can your groceries come to you? Do you need to go to the meeting, or can the meeting come to you? I'm in San Jose, and I'm not going to come to a Philly or a Philly transportation camp, but I'm glad to be here today, here, right? And so talking with all of you. So I think I just question whether the product of a fixed route is relevant anymore. To your point, David, who we're serving in the future, and I think this is going to be true, primarily who we're serving in the future is service workers who are just, to some degree, all over the place. And we need to find technology to get them in. And I do believe that there is a fixed route piece of that, or like one of the things, there's this company called Pantonium. I've been listening to their podcast, and I'll shut up. They let you put these virtual, let's say at the Walmart, you're going to need to give people a fixed route, essentially. Like, you can guarantee them every 30 minutes this flexible transit system is going to come here, just stand here. You don't need a smartphone. You don't need anything. You just get on the bus like you normally would. You can put that into what is otherwise a flexible system, possibly, right? These are the technology needs to be figured out. And if you start to see enough of that, we come back to fixed routes, but they could be completely different. They could be drawn not by a Jarrett Walker and some professional planners, but drawn essentially crowdsourced by the demand that's out there, and then put in place so your operations can get more efficient, which will need to happen. Some thoughts.
I definitely agree with the, what policies can we put in place to just to create the future that we want to see, that's resilient for climate and all of that, and making the best use of investments we have. I think, though, that the future of transit, I would like to see transit used for, commuting is only a certain portion of all the trips that are made. How can we make transit more easier for your grocery trips or entertainment? If I'm going to go out to dinner and I want to have a half bottle of wine, then it'd be great if transit were a competitive option for me to do that safely. And so I think maybe that's one thing to keep in mind of that more all day travel, not just commute focused. And something we've done when we have worked with transit agencies on ridership is, think about it as the whole customer experience. Don't just look at what's your highest ridership, but what do your riders actually experience? And if someone has never taken transit before, how easy is it for them to understand the system? How can you improve that? Because I think that's definitely a barrier for folks. If, I don't really know, how do I pay my fare? How do I know what stop I'm supposed to get off at? All that stuff is pretty hard. At least on the bus, it's a little easier on the light rail or commuter rail. But yeah, so just I think taking that different shift of, if Uber and Lyft are already doing this really well, looking at the customer experience and making a good, providing a quality service. And I think we try to bring that to our consulting for transit agencies of how can you address pain points that your customers, that your riders are feeling to be a more competitive choice, and to help people, just move the needle a little and bring people to transit. And then maybe these partnerships of using the flexible or on-demand sort of system to feed into transit rather than having those be competing with one another.
That happens a lot organically. If you go to any terminal station at pretty much any system in the country, there's always cabs waiting there. No one had to teach them how to do that. And when I worked for New York City, that's a phenomenon there too. The end of every subway line was kind of a natural taxi stand. We actually discussed that. Should we make that formal and kind of set up a formal system? And then we kind of realized we don't actually have to do anything. Like, just leave it alone. Don't seize any cars there. Don't hassle people. Was the approach we took. But I think, there's a real difference between kind of the have cities and the have not cities with transit, where New York, Philadelphia, Boston, DC is just kind of assumed like, yeah, it's an option. Everybody kind of knows roughly. Although we still have to yell at people down here to walk left and stand right on the escalators. But I think, kind of the middle America problem is, how do you get Joe Average to ride the bus when there's so much stigma attached to it and they don't know how it works and never in their whole life have they done it. And I'm going to do a little pitch for my presentation, which talks a little about a place that has cracked the code. But all joking aside, I think, yeah, like I've ridden transit in San Diego. It's actually pretty convenient if you want to go to certain places. But kind of as a citywide option and that point to point, it really falls short in a lot of ways. And you know, that's a Jarrett Walker problem, right? Like, what's your trade-off? Do you want coverage? Do you want frequency? Like, some of these things work against each other, and I think really there's no one better in the business who explains what those trade-offs are. But that's ultimately comes down to your citizens and whether they just want to trade off for sitting in traffic on a freeway. And it's really interesting that I was in Oklahoma a couple of years ago, and I was explaining kind of an autonomous vehicle program to someone. And the first question out of their mouth was, well, what about my freedom? How do you have control? Like, I'd actually, you know, I ran into it in the wild, and I was really, like, dumbfounded. I'm like, you tell the robot where to go. Like, who cares whether you're driving or the robot's driving? You tell it where you want to go, and it brings you there. And then they calm down, like, oh, okay, I didn't realize. Like, the second you talk about anything other than you're driving your own car, people have a little freak out. Unless they're going to someplace where it's just considered the norm, like on vacation, right? Or you go into the airport. Like, lots of people take airport shuttles and like little airport monorails and stuff, and nobody says anything about it. I've never seen a complaint anywhere in any circumstance about getting on this weird train or this weird bus. They just do it. How do you bring the the Avis airport shuttle experience to the middle of the city? Like, look, I've seen like the stodgiest business travelers just like get on the Hertz bus, no problem. That's just what you do, right? It's finding the key to unlocking that experience and that's fixed route. That's not on demand. You know, I've never seen anyone take an Uber to the rental car hub. That would be weird. That'd be really weird. But this was great. Thank you for this and showing us that data tool. That looks like a fun toy to play with.
Definitely.
Yeah, thank you for a great session, Cecily.
Glad it went well. It was my first time doing an on-conference like this, so definitely really interesting.
You're a natural, and just to say, some of us are super campers and actually travel around the country to the different conferences pre-COVID. I've been to Transportation Camp LA. I would definitely go to a Bay Area one if there was one. Like, and please come out to the East Coast and come to the DC or Philadelphia or New York camps.
Yeah.
They're worth it.
Well, you get a discount. Well, you did get a discount on that airfare. David's being disingenuous. He used to work at an airport, so.
I did. Just for a little bit, not too much.
Just for a little. But he also travels a lot, and if Bakari's around, Bakari goes to a lot of them too. If you've run into him, but there's a community of us who go to like a lot of these because TRB is $1,000 to walk in the door, and it's really hard to just have a conversation like this one and just like meet people and like we're not bidding for freeway reconstruction here. We're not bidding for freeway reconstruction, anything like that. We're just talking about.
I think that's time.
Good, it's lunchtime. All right, see everybody on the flip side.
Thank you all. I'll stop the recording.